All right, so what was an example of a major American corporation was the bell ringer that we entered into Canvas chats, and that ties to what we'll be talking about in this unit, labor and business. And so hopefully you had time to open up the Econ for reading and make sure you type comments in the margin. Major points on the right, one major point per section or half page. And you just need 2 to 3 comments or questions on the left-hand side. The notes for today, there'll be 4 days of notes since this is a shorter week. We'll talk about the labor market today, labor unions tomorrow, then sole proprietorships and partnerships on Wednesday, and Thursday will be corporations and other types of businesses. So first today, let's look at the labor market. So who is included in the labor market? Labor market inclusion. Well, the first group that's included in the labor market, not surprisingly, are the employed. And you might think it's as simple as saying this person has a job or not, but then the question is what qualifies as a job? If you rake leaves for your grandparent, does that count as a job? Well, that depends. So there are 3 reasons why someone could be classified as employed. One is they work for at least 1 hour of pay in the last week. The second is they work 15 hours or more with a family business. So a family farm or something like that, they can be included as employed. And then, of course, is if they have an excused absence under the law. So an illness, if their company allows vacation time, or perhaps there was a labor strike, which is allowed under the law, bad weather, maybe the state shut down roads because of a blizzard. These would all be reasons why someone is still employed. The other group of people that are included in the labor force are the unemployed. And you might think, well, that's just anyone without a job. But it's not that simple. First off, they must have searched for a job within the last month. Second is they are going to be called back to a job. So they know they're going to start back in a couple weeks. And the last one is you're waiting to start a new job within the next 30 days. So who is not included in all this? Well, a big one would be discouraged workers. People who are no longer looking for a job but might want one. They're known as discouraged workers. So when you're filing for unemployment insurance, for instance, you have to verify that you've been searching for a job in the last 30 days. So once people stop doing that, once people stop filing for unemployment insurance, they're no longer included in the labor force. So when you see that unemployment rate of 6%, that does not include people who have been discouraged from looking. It also does not include, obviously, young children, retirees, the military, because that can bias the numbers. North Korea looks like they have a lot of men working, but they really don't. Prisoners, yes, I know they make license plates and other stuff like that, but they're not included in the labor force. And other institutionalized persons. So none of these people are included in the labor force. So really, even though we have over 330 million people in the United States, the labor force is less than 200 million. Once you take
without illegal immigrants.
Illegal immigrants, that's a good question. Well, they're part of the black market, so generally they're not going to be counted unless the business that employs them is dumb enough to include their payroll and their taxes and other stuff like that. But it seems unlikely that they would be included. That's a good question. The labor market itself is influenced by supply and demand. Supply and demand. In most marketplaces, like if you sell shoes, the shoemaker is the supplier and the person that buying it is the consumer. So in most cases, we are the ones demanding, but not in the labor market. In the labor market, individual people sell their labor. And so it's one of the few times that the average person is actually a supplier. We supply our labor. Some people supply a lot of labor. Some people don't supply a lot of labor. But people supply the labor. And then there's demand. The consumer of labor, the one demanding, are businesses, the government, and other employers. They are purchasing labor. So in most cases, it's the people going to the store and picking things off the shelf. Well, actually, in this case, businesses and the government are coming along and purchasing your labor. They're the ones demanding it. And of course, what comes out of the labor market would be productivity, the value of output. And there are some workers that are paid based on productivity, but sometimes that is difficult to measure. If teachers were paid based on productivity, it would be based on how many diplomas, so everybody would pass. So that obviously wouldn't be a good idea. Some type of doctors, like an oncologist that treats cancer, obviously they're not going to have a high success rate when it comes to patients that are successfully treated. So that doesn't work with every type of job. The main reason why pay exists is because of the interaction of supply and demand. And that's what can explain high wages. High wages are the result of either the supply being low or the demand being high. So whenever unemployment is really low, that means both of these things are happening. The economy is expanding, so there's high demand. People want to hire. And then there's low supply because most people already have jobs. So that drives wages up. If you have difficulty finding enough people to enter nursing, then the supply is low. So you're probably going to have to offer more money. During a pandemic, there's an increased demand for doctors and nurses. So there's going to be pressure for wages to rise. What kind of jobs often see high pay? Jobs that require a lot of training or skill. So therefore, there's not a lot of people willing to do them, so the supply is really low. And that's a mistake people make. They often look at pay and think that equates to productivity or usefulness of a job, but that's actually not true. Professional entertainers, whether actors, musicians, athletes, are, unnecessary to society, but they make lots of money. And why? Because there's few people that can have that level of talent, and then there's lots of people that demand to see it. Firms will often respond to higher wages by finding cheaper labor elsewhere, or replacing it with technology. Replacing it with technology. This will be happening more and more in particular because labor is an extravagant cost for businesses. It often makes up the bulk of their expenses, unless they have a lot of high-tech machinery in that to pay for. But if the machinery cost is lower and they can replace workers, obviously they're going to do that. I see a number of memes saying if you raise the minimum wage, this is who will greet you at your store, and there's a picture of one of those automatic checkout stations. Well, that's already been happening. They've already been replacing people with those, and it will continue to happen. So it doesn't matter if the minimum wage goes up or not in reference to that particular facet. Employees who want higher wages either have to look for a job elsewhere, improve their skill set, or form a union. Look for a job elsewhere, improve their skill set, or form a union. And just to show you the wages and how they work, whenever we plot supply and demand, we'll learn more about this later, you can graph them, and supply always goes from bottom left to top right, and demand always goes from top left to bottom right. And wherever they intersect is what we call the equilibrium, in this case, an equilibrium wage. So fitness trainers, there is going to be a large supply of people that can be fitness trainers. And so because of this, the wage is going to be 1096. However, there's not a lot of people that are going to want to handle hazardous materials. And so notice the supply is way down here, so the quantity is much greater, but supply is way back here, which means the quantity of people willing to do the job is a lot less. And so therefore the wage is going to be higher. It's not significantly higher because it doesn't necessarily require a whole lot of training, but it is going to be higher than a fitness trainer just because there's more people willing to do it. Now you have other things like a doctor or a nurse, they're going to be way back here. Or a professional athlete is going to be way back here. So their wages are going to be much higher. And that is often determined by levels of skill. Levels of skill. The lowest level of skill is referred to as unskilled labor. Virtually no training and no machinery, or at least complex machinery. Here, take this mop, drag it across the floor. That's unskilled labor. The next level is semi-skilled, which means you can operate electric machinery with minimal training. Operate electrical machinery with minimal training. So basic tools, a lawnmower might be an example. Yes, I know many of them run by gas, but they do have batteries too. So semi-skilled labor. Skilled is that you're trained to operate complex equipment. So many pieces of construction equipment, for instance, truck drivers. And then there's professional labor, which involves a high level of complexity that is specialized and results from lots of training. So, doctors, nurses, lawyers, journalists, teachers, professional athletes, that also requires lots of specialized training. Being a musician, any of those would fall under this one in particular. Being an electrician, a plumber, so it doesn't necessarily need a college degree, it could be a trade degree. These are all professional levels of labor. And obviously, the more time that you have to put in, the more highly specialized skill that you have, then your supply of labor is going to be lower and the pay is going to be much higher. So, a professional baseball player, a brain surgeon, they both require lots of time and effort and training, but they also involve a lot of special natural skill. Like there are a lot of people that love baseball and they work really hard, but they're never going to be a Major League Baseball player. There are some doctors, no matter how hard they practice, they're not going to be a surgeon because that involves good use of hand and eye coordination and so on. So there are jobs that you can train for, but if you don't have that special skill set, you're not going to be one of those few people that can supply the labor. That's all the notes for today. Tomorrow we'll talk about organized labor. For the remainder of the period, make sure that you do as much as you can of the reading. Try to get as much completed as possible for that assignment.